President Reagan first said that he was going to go ahead with tonight's scheduled State of the Union speech, then decided to put it off when the full dimension of the tragedy sank in. White House correspondent Leslie Stahl reports.
At the White House, the president watched a replay of the tragedy this morning in stunned silence. He said it was a horrible thing, a tremendous shock.
Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country.
The president postponed his upbeat State of the Union speech tonight for 1 week and sent Vice President Bush off to Cape Canaveral this afternoon to convey his feelings personally to the families. But despite his sorrow, the president said he's determined that the space program continue.
We don't hide our space program. We don't keep secrets and cover things up. We do it all up front and in public. That's the way freedom is, and we wouldn't change it for a minute. We'll continue our quest in space. There will be more shuttle flights and more shuttle crews, and yes, more volunteers, more civilians, more teachers in space. Nothing ends here.
It was Mr. Reagan's idea to send a teacher into space. Krista McAuliffe was his first thought when he heard the news this morning. The president called the entire crew courageous pioneers who gave their lives on the new frontier.
We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God.
Space Agency officials waited most of the day before saying anything, and when they did speak, it was only to say they won't say anything until and unless they know for sure what happened, what went wrong. David Martin reports the investigation, day one.
NASA doesn't know what happened, and neither do the makers of these white solid rocket boosters, which helped lift the shuttle from the launch pad.
I don't believe there's sufficient evidence on the replays to be able to ascertain the nature of the problem.
Or the makers of the orange external fuel tank, which carried 500,000 pounds of highly volatile liquid hydrogen and oxygen.
What we have is what you see on television, and it's very hard to tell anything from that.
While investigators search for answers, there is only speculation by informed observers about the apparent leak which touched off the giant fireball, dwarfing the remains of one of the 140-foot solid rocket boosters.
It appears that there were some burn-throughs and some flame leaks coming out, and once this extremely hot gas comes out, it could ignite an explosion of the external tank.
But another expert said that alone could not have caused the massive fireball.
The very large explosion that took place would have to have involved the propellants in this large tank.
The hydrogen and oxygen.
Hydrogen and oxygen in that tank.
What could have caused the external tank to fail like that? Could it have been unexpected weather conditions high in the atmosphere?
Winds aloft looked good. We didn't have any exceedances as far as our load indicators are concerned, to my knowledge, and we thought everything was in good shape for a launch this morning.
Could it have been the ice which coated the shuttle just hours before launch? Most observers say no, since the launch was delayed to allow the ice time to melt.
Right now, there are many more questions than answers. Until the investigators can come up with both answers and solutions, no more Americans will venture into space. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
In a moment, the U.S. space program under pressure. Was it too much pressure?
Kellogg's Special K Breakfast. Low fat, less than 220 calories. Try it on. You'll like what you see.
Well, the 4-hour cough medicine didn't last me through the day.
I know.
The 6-hour didn't last me through the night.
I know, Alan.
Why doesn't somebody invent
A 12-hour cough medicine? Somebody has, Alan.
Introducing 12-Hour Delsum. Only Delsum has a patented timed-release formula that lasts up to 12 hours for hours more relief than regular cough medicines. Each dose helps you work all day and sleep all night. 12-hour timed-release Delsum for hours more cough relief.
Terrific.
Even before today's tragedy, some were raising questions about whether tighter dollars and tight schedules for shuttle launches were forcing U.S. space scientists to promise more than they could deliver. Bob Schieffer has been looking into this.
Welcome back to Earth, you seasoned space veterans.
It has become so routine, we tend to forget how complicated and dangerous it has always been. Ironically, yesterday was the 19th anniversary of the only other fatal accident in the U.S. space program, the 1967 fire that took the lives of astronauts Gus Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee, who were killed when their capsule ignited on the launch pad.
We've gone for main engine start.
As NASA moved into the shuttle era, the agency argued the flights were becoming safe enough for civilians to go along. Today, former astronaut Frank Borman said that was wrong.
It's a little improper to believe that we can put congressmen and senators and school teachers up there without exposing them to dangers that before were simply accepted by test pilots.
There have been close calls all along. In 1970, an oxygen tank blew up on a spacecraft headed for the moon. The astronauts got home safely. But James Lovell, who was on board, said the danger of spaceflight can never be discounted.
We're going at high speeds, great pressures going through the atmosphere. So this business is not your regular 8 to 5 business.
As the astronauts switched from space capsules to the shuttle, there were frequent equipment problems. In 1983, for example, no one was hurt, but power units caught fire as one flight was returning to Earth.
If we haven't been pushing our luck, we really have been pushing the technology pretty hard.
And with the federal deficit making it harder to fund the space program, Evel questions whether too many flights have been scheduled in an effort to make them more cost-effective.
I think the pressures, yes, I think the pressures have been there to increase the tempo and to, just as an airline does, make it pay for itself.
Whatever the case, the feeling from Capitol Hill tonight is that funding will now be harder to come by. NASA had hoped that putting civilians like Krista McAuliffe on board would build more public support for the space program. But after today's tragedy, the result may be just the opposite. Dan?
Thank you, Bob. The Challenger was one of 4 shuttles, a kind of flying mule, a dependable mule that had flown successfully many times before. We're going to show you one of those flights from last October 30th, side by side with today's disastrous mission. Challenger's 3 main engines had just throttled up normally. Then the explosion. It happened about the time when wind and other atmospheric conditions would begin to place maximum pressure on the craft. Had the flight gone on as planned, the 2 solid rocket boosters would have flamed out and peeled away. That was scheduled to happen within a minute past where the blast happened today. We'll have brief words on today's other news and more of our coverage of today's space shuttle disaster when we return.